Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the shadows, into the grim, dangerous, and far from glamorous world of medieval assassins. You know the ones, the quiet figures creeping through castle corridors or alleyways, changing the course of history with nothing but a blade and a whisper. Now, movies and games. They love to romanticize these shadowy figures. Long coats, smooth kills, rooftop escapes. But let me tell you the truth. Being a medieval assassin, it was miserable. Before we get into the meat of it, take a second to like the video. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, subscribe if you haven't already, and in the comments, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always wild seeing how far this little corner of the internet stretches. All right, dim the lights, maybe grab a drink, and let's get into tonight's tale. Let's be clear from the jump. Nobody in medieval times just chose to be an assassin. Nobody woke up thinking, you know what would really spice up my life? Stabbing a nobleman in the neck for 12 silver coins and then hiding in a barrel of fish for 3 days. That wasn't a career path, it was a last resort. A final station on the life has officially gone off the rails express. Most medieval assassins weren't elite warriors raised in temples by blind monks. They were peasants with nothing left, disgraced soldiers, career thieves with good aim, or people who lived so far off the radar that they could literally disappear after killing someone and not a single soul would notice. See if you were doing okay. If you had land, a family, even a decent goat. You didn't become an assassin. You hired one. But if your life was burned to the ground and all you had was a dagger, a name whispered in a back alley, and the ability to sneak into a tavern unseen, well, congratulations. You were in the running. And here's the kicker. You weren't getting sent after Jeff, the friendly candle maker. No. Your target was usually some warlord baron with his own personal militia, or a bishop with more gold than faith. The job terrifying, the pay tempting, but usually a lie. And by the time someone accepted it, they already had nothing to lose. No home, no safety, and definitely no dental plan. Let's not pretend there were perks either. No medals, no retirement, no break rooms, or casual Fridays. You couldn't just slap a wooden sign outside your hut that said eliminations by appointment only. Your job was to stay invisible, move fast, and absolutely never admit what you did, especially not in the middle of a tavern after 2 pints of ale. Oh me, I sell carpets. Very messy carpets. Lots of stains. So yeah, nobody dreamed of this life. They ended up there because they had no other choice. The world chewed them up, spit them out, and left them crawling through alleyways with a rusty knife and a pocket full of regret. You weren't the hero. You weren't even the villain. You were the silent footnote in someone else's story, the one that made everyone nervous but no one dared name. And now let's bust the first big myth. The training montage. Contrary to every video game ever made, medieval assassins didn't train by candlelight under the watchful eye of some wise old mentor. There was no flute music, no temple, no elegant hand-to-hand combat lessons in a monastery. There were no manuals, no welcome kits. If you learned anything, it was by surviving your first few mistakes. And man, those mistakes could be fatal. Most assassins were self-taught. That meant if you had some military background, cool, you knew how to hold a knife properly. If not, well, stabbing someone isn't rocket science, but surviving the aftermath. That's where things got tricky. And poison. Forget the clean, cinematic poison drop in a goblet of wine. Using poison in the Middle Ages was basically high-stakes guesswork with herbs, minerals, or whatever gross thing you could boil into a paste. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the target just burped weird and became really suspicious of his dinner. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup. There was no poison control center. No medieval ER, just trial error and a strong stomach. And sure, if you were lottery lucky, you might have crossed paths with a thief or mercenary willing to show you a trick or two. Maybe someone taught you how to walk without your boots squeaking on cobblestone. But mentoring, that was rare. Most seasoned assassins didn't pass down tips. They just vanished or died. Weapons training. Don't get your hopes up. You didn't have a secret armory. You had a dagger probably stolen off a guard or a length of rope you hoped you could figure out in the moment. Maybe, just maybe, a garrote if you were feeling especially fancy. You weren't rolling into a castle with dual blades and smoke bombs. You were lucky if your knife didn't snap the second it hit bone. And if something went wrong, if your blade broke or you dropped it down a well, you improvised. A brick, a belt, your boot buckle if you were really desperate. Every mission felt like a gamble, with your life as the ante. Success didn't come from years of training. It came from surviving long enough to learn from your own disasters. You learned how to kill by doing it poorly quickly, and with enough panic to get you moving before someone pinned a sketch of your face to a church door. Your education didn't end in a ceremony. There were no robes or diplomas, just scars, paranoia, and the creeping realization that if you messed up even once, no one would be there to help, because no one even knew you existed. So now, you've taken the job. You're officially an assassin. You've accepted the task, probably because your options were die slowly or die quickly, but with a payday attached. And why did you say yes? One word coin, that sweet heavy clink of silver, the promise of a better night's sleep, maybe a warm meal, maybe just the illusion of control over your own life. But here's where the fantasy dies fast. Most assassins didn't actually get paid. At least not the way they thought they would. The deal usually sounded simple. A coin pouch now. Another one when the job's done. No names, no paperwork. Just a nod and a whisper. Handle it. But here's the catch. When the job is done, doesn't mean after a handshake and a thank you. It means after the client's double-checked that you didn't botch the kill, didn't leave a trail, didn't draw attention, and most importantly, didn't live long enough to tell anyone what happened. Let that sink in. You might sneak through shadows, risk your neck to take out a paranoid baron in his sleep. And after all that, you come back and suddenly the client is gone. Moved cities, disappeared. Or worse, they send someone to take you out. Why pay you when a knife to the ribs is cheaper? And even when you did get the money, when everything went according to plan, you'd find out fast that it wasn't nearly enough. Not for the risk, not for the blood, not for the 3 days you spent hiding in a latrine barrel with fleas chewing on your dignity. You'd get a handful of silver coins, a suspicious nod, and the unspoken understanding disappear. You were never here. This conversation didn't happen. And here's a fun bonus. Sometimes the whole job was fake, a setup. You'd be given a high-profile target only to find out you just walked into a political trap. Your target was a decoy surrounded by guards with orders to kill you on sight. Congratulations, you're now starring in someone else's betrayal narrative. Bonus points if your name is already carved into a gallows plank. What were you going to do? Complain? Take your case to court? Your Honor, I'd like to file a breach of contract. My employer promised 12 coins and betrayed me after I assassinated a bishop. Yeah, that's not how medieval justice worked. You'd be lucky if they didn't hang you just for showing up. So eventually, you learned. You learned to demand payment up front. You learned to trust no one, not even the messenger who swore this job would change your life, because it would change your life by shortening it dramatically. Being a medieval assassin meant living off broken promises. It meant learning how to vanish before someone broke you to pieces. But let's say you survived the betrayal. You got paid. You're battered, paranoid, probably missing a few teeth, but you're alive. Time to talk about your gear. Because, oh boy, forget everything you've seen in fantasy shows. There were no retractable wrist blades, no enchanted cloaks, no magical daggers humming with power. Your tool set was whatever you could afford, steal or hide under your patchy cloak without it clanking like a bell tower. If you were really lucky, like found a gold coin in a dead man's boot, lucky you had a good dagger. Sharp, not too rusty, maybe even balanced. But chances are it was nicked dull and smelled like whatever unfortunate soul you last used it on. Poison it existed. But again, this wasn't sleek or elegant. It was messy, unpredictable, made from herbs, minerals, crushed insects, or toad guts. Sometimes it worked quickly. Sometimes it made your target vomit for 2 days and live. Or sometimes you drank from the wrong cup. Oops. There was no medieval poison testing strip. You guessed, hoped, and moved on. Ropes. They were decent multi-tools. Good for strangling, climbing, or tying up something or someone. But you had to be fast. Nothing ruins a stealth kill like fumbling a knot and muttering wait. Is it loop under or over? Bows, highly effective. Sure, if you had one, could aim it well and weren't trying to smuggle it into a castle dressed as a servant. But most of the time, assassinations weren't sniping missions. They were up-close, personal, and ugly. You weren't performing some ballet of death. You were lunging, slashing, and trying not to scream when your knee hit a chair you didn't see coming. And here's the worst part, you didn't get backups. If your only blade broke mid-job, tough luck. Now, it's time to improvise. Slate roof tile works. Rusty nail. Maybe. A sharpened chicken bone. If that's all you got, swing for the neck and pray. You hid your tools wherever you could. In boots, hems, hollowed out loaves of bread if needed. And you kept them close, not for safety, but because, in your world, your weapon was everything. It was your best friend, your boss, and your retirement plan. There was no upgrade bench, no magical blacksmith ready to refine your gear. The only thing you prayed for was that your weapon didn't snap or betray you mid-strike. Because in the end, your weapon didn't matter nearly as much as your nerve. You didn't survive by the quality of your gear. You survived by sheer stubbornness and fear. You made miracles happen with a rusted blade, a ratty cloak, and the silence of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to have a name. Because assassins didn't carry prestige. They carried the weight of the kill and the certainty that no one would ever build a statue in their honor. No matter how many lives they ended, no matter how many kings fell by their hand, their greatest tool wasn't a dagger or poison. It was anonymity. And if that cracked for even a second, if someone remembered your face, you were already dead. Let's make something crystal clear. Medieval assassins didn't get easy targets. You weren't slipping into the woods to take out Carl the drunk shepherd or Larry the sleepy blacksmith. No one paid good silver to kill the guy who owed 2 chickens and had a limp. Nope. You were being sent after people who mattered. Nobles, bishops, generals, maybe even royalty. And guess what? Those people were incredibly hard to kill. Let's start with the guards. You weren't dealing with one or two half-asleep sentries with poor night vision. You were dealing with dozens. Some guarded the front. Others paced the back. Some lurked in hidden hallways. They weren't there to chat. They were trained, armored, and very ready to turn you into a decorative pincushion. You had to spend days, sometimes weeks, watching, studying guard rotations, memorizing patrol routes, learning how many stairs it took before the fat knight wheezed and leaned on the banister for a break. You were a ghost with a notebook. Except your notebook was your brain, and forgetting anything could kill you. Then there were the walls. Castles weren't cute little houses with garden fences. They were fortresses, gatehouses, towers, murder holes, and sometimes entire moats filled with stuff that wanted to bite. Even if you made it past the drawbridge, you still had arrow slits and boiling oil to contend with. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description included maybe flambéed for peeking. And once you got inside, it didn't get easier. Now, you had to deal with the staff, the cooks, the stable hands, the scribes. These people noticed things. They knew who belonged and who didn't. You couldn't just stroll into the great hall wearing a borrowed robe and hope for the best. One wrong look, one fumbled chamber pot, one confused, yes, milady, the soup is boiling. And the next thing you knew, someone was whispering to the captain of the guard while you quietly backed toward the window you climbed in through. Servants might not have swords, but they had gossip. And medieval gossip traveled faster than a knight chasing glory. If someone even thought you looked out of place, word spread. The baker's wife told the chambermaid. The chambermaid told the cook. The cook told the steward. The steward told the guard. And the guard told his sword right through your ribs. And let's not forget your actual target. They weren't stupid. They were paranoid for good reason. They had food tasters. They had locks on their doors. They had secret escape routes and decoy bedrooms. Some even rotated rooms every night, like they were playing some deadly version of musical chairs. And if you heard they were going to be at a feast, don't celebrate yet, because even if they were drunk, so was everyone else, including you. And you still had to get through armed guards, guard dogs, a jester who was way too perceptive, and about 50 half-sober guests who'd all remember the guy who knocked over the wine barrel on his way to use the privy. Even getting close to your target could take weeks. You might have to pose as a servant bribe the chambermaid or hide in barrels. You'd crouch in a storage room for hours listening for the signal. And when the moment came, you had one shot. No do-overs, no take-backs, no sorry I missed. One clean strike, one drop. And then you vanish. No screams, no blood trail, no witnesses. Just silence and maybe a breeze to rustle the curtains behind you. Because if you messed up, you didn't get fired. You got turned into a warning. Public. Painful. And usually placed somewhere prominent with a wooden sign that read, "Nice try." And let's talk about what you looked like. You think you wore sleek black robes with tailored belts and whisper-quiet boots? Nope. You looked like a sick goat herder with a guilt complex. Disguises in the Middle Ages were not glamorous. You didn't have wardrobes full of costumes. You had whatever you could find that didn't scream, "I'm here to kill your nobleman." Usually that meant peasant rags, a robe 2 sizes too big, or a stolen guard tunic that still smelled like the guy you pulled it off of. You tried to blend in, men. But blending in meant really leaning into the look dirt under your nails, limp from an old injury twitch in your eye, from living on cabbage soup and anxiety. If you looked too clean, too confident, boom. Suspicious. Forget masks. Those weren't a thing. You didn't have a Guy Fawkes mask or a sleek leather hood. cover your face too much and people thought you were a leper, which was great for making people avoid you, but horrible for getting through castle gates. If anyone asked who you were, you had to think fast. I'm Brother Tobias. I do rooftop maintenance and silent prayers. And if you somehow made it into the household undetected, your job wasn't done. Oh no. Now you had to stay undetected. That meant remembering names, faces, chores, and exactly how the cook likes his stew stirred. Slip. Once, you'd hear those dreaded words, "I've never seen you before." And suddenly your disguise turns into a funeral outfit. If your cover worked, great. Now, you had to sit through hours of pretending you cared about folding sheets or polishing armor. And meanwhile, every person that walked by was a potential witness, or worse, another assassin after the same mark. And if you needed to age yourself, there were no wigs, no stage makeup. You smeared dirt on your face, squinted real hard, and hoped nobody noticed your beard was glued on with honey. In short, your disguise didn't protect you. It bought you maybe 5 minutes of confusion. And if you couldn't use those 5 minutes to either vanish or finish the job, you were done. Because no one survives being the assassin caught in the bishop's laundry room wearing a nun's habit and holding a bloody dagger, especially not on a feast day. All right, so you've accepted the kill. You've planned the infiltration. Maybe you've even pulled off a flawless disguise and made it past 2 layers of guards and a suspicious servant girl with a nose for strangers. You're in. You're close. But here's the thing. You're alone. Always. This wasn't a spy thriller with a team of specialists backing you up. There was no clever alchemist sending you coded messages. No charming sidekick with a crossbow waiting on the roof. No handler whispering encouragement from a candle-lit safe house. It was just you, a blade, and a whole lot of trust issues because, in the Middle Ages, being an assassin wasn't a job that encouraged socializing. There weren't real assassin guilds like the games would have you believe, at least not the kind you could count on. Sure, rumors of secret brotherhoods and oaths whispered in the dark existed, but most of that was tavern talk fueled by cheap wine and the need to make sense of the fear. If another assassin existed near you, chances are you'd never meet them. And if you did, it wasn't for tea. It was probably because one of you had been hired to kill the other. Why the isolation? Simple. The fewer people who knew who you were, the longer you lived. Every conversation was a risk. Every friend was a potential snitch. Even your client probably didn't know your real name, and if they did, well, you were already planning how to disappear afterward, just in case. Companionship. That was a joke. Friends asked questions. Lovers noticed things like the blood under your fingernails, the bruises you didn't explain, or why you slept with a dagger under the mattress. And you couldn't afford to tell anyone the truth, not your neighbor, not your drinking buddy, not the girl who sold bread at the market who always smiled a little too kindly. Because once someone knew, you became vulnerable. And in your world, vulnerability was a luxury you absolutely could not afford. So you didn't settle down. You didn't buy a house. You didn't raise a family in the countryside and take up wood carving on weekends. You moved constantly. You slept in barns, abandoned towers, even caves. You changed your name like a shirt and trusted nobody, not even yourself. Even among criminals, you were the outsider. Thieves and smugglers. They had networks, communities, rules. They were social, talkative. They laughed in taverns and shared secrets. You were the guy in the corner. Hood pulled low, eyes on every exit, knife never far from your hand. They feared you, or worse, they saw you as a liability. Because your profession didn't just make people disappear. It invited attention. Guards' bounties, torches in the night. No one wanted to be caught near you when that hammer came down. And sympathy, forget it. You couldn't cry into your ale about how hard it was to strangle someone who was just too nice. If you tried, people would either think you were lying or label you dangerous. And honestly, they'd be right on both counts. So you kept it all inside. The guilt, the fear, the scars that didn't bleed but never healed. You drank in silence, ate in silence, slept lightly, dreamed rarely, trusted nothing. At inns, you chose the darkest corner, sat with your back to the wall, watched the door, always. You didn't stay in one place more than a night. You never got drunk enough to forget where you were. And you never, ever told anyone your name unless they paid you first. And even then, it was probably a fake, because being a medieval assassin meant perfecting the art of vanishing, not just from rooms, not just from guards, but from people, from memories, from the version of yourself that once smiled without checking who was watching. Let's talk about what happened when you froze, because every assassin, no matter how experienced, had a moment. Maybe your target turned around and looked you right in the eye. Maybe he was holding a child. Maybe you saw your reflection in the blade trembling in your own hand. And suddenly every plan, every step, every whisper of courage, gone. Your breath caught, your muscles locked. The knife didn't move, and in that instant, you were dead, because failure wasn't an option. Not in this job. There were no performance reviews, no second chances, no better luck next time. There was only death. And usually the kind that involved a crowd, a noose, and a whole lot of screaming. And not just your death. Your target, if they survived, would tell everyone, immediately. The castle would go into lockdown. Sketches would be posted. Names whispered. Suddenly, you weren't a shadow. You were the problem. And now, every door you thought was safe was locked. Every alley patrolled. Every whisper had your name in it. And worst of all, you weren't just running from the guards. You were running from your client. Because to them, a failed assassin wasn't a tool, they were a threat. Someone who could be tortured for information. Someone who might talk. Someone who might say the wrong name at the wrong time. So they'd put out a new contract on you. And this time, you wouldn't be the one hiding in the shadows. You'd be the one hoping someone else failed before they reached your throat. Let's be real. The failure wasn't just dangerous. It was humiliating. You didn't just miss the kill, you failed to be perfect. And in this job, perfection was survival. Anything less might as well come with a handwritten invitation to the gallows. Didn't matter how many jobs you'd done. Didn't matter if you succeeded 12 times before. Because in the world of assassins, you were only as good as your last kill. And if that kill didn't happen, you'd better start running. So you did it. The plan worked. The disguise held. The dagger found its mark. One clean, silent kill. No screams, no mess, no mistakes. Just a body crumpling to the ground while the candlelight flickered like it was applauding. You'd think this was the moment to breathe. Celebrate even. Wrong. Because now begins the second more dangerous part of the job, getting out alive. See, Hollywood loves to end it here. The assassin stands calmly on a rooftop, sipping wine while the city burns in the background. Cue slow motion exit and a dramatic music swell. But in reality, you're sprinting down a servant hallway with someone's blood on your boots, a cramp in your side, and a dog already barking from the courtyard. There's no dramatic pause. No admiring your work. The moment your blade hit you became the most wanted person in the entire city. And the city knew how to respond. Alarms rang. Guards were mobilized. Doors slammed shut. Gatehouses were sealed. The moment word spread that a noble had been assassinated in his own home, the whole region went into lockdown. And you were in the middle of it, trapped. You had to plan your exit before you even stepped foot near your target. You needed routes, backup routes, disguises, safe houses, contacts, maybe a ferryman who owed you a favor, or at least someone willing to lie about seeing you leave. Even then, none of it guaranteed survival, because everyone had your description now. Or worse, a sketch hastily drawn, but close enough to make any stranger suspicious. Slim-billed dark cloak scar on the cheek. That might describe half the population, but it didn't matter. You were a ghost no one had seen, and now you were a name everyone wanted to catch. Maybe armed. Definitely dangerous. Extremely stabby. Let's not forget the guards. The same ones you snuck past on the way in. They're awake now, motivated, furious. Some of them might have been loyal to your target. Others just thrilled for an excuse to bash someone's skull in. And what about your client? Oh, you thought they'd be waiting for you? Pouch of coins in hand, smiling like you did them a solid. Please. The moment the deed was done, they were gone. Slipped out of the city, changed names, burned letters. Because now you were a threat. You'd proven you could get close. You'd proven you could kill. That made you useful before. Now, it made you dangerous. Even if they promised to protect you, you knew better. The second you turned your back, there might be a new assassin sent to take care of their unfinished business. Because the most dangerous person, after a successful assassination, the one who actually pulled it off. And even if somehow you got paid, what then? You couldn't stay. You had to vanish. Again. New name. New city. New disguise. Maybe you shaved your beard, faked a limp, picked up an accent, and joined a group of monks headed east. You didn't get to relax. You got to start the game all over again. And it never stopped. Because even if you disappeared completely, even if you fled to a fishing village where no one could pronounce your real name, you lived every day waiting for the knock on the door. The one that came just a little too early. The one followed by silence. Because someone always talked. Someone always found out. And someone always wanted revenge. So yes, you made the kill. The job was done. But now, you run like hell. And if being hunted, betrayed, and utterly alone wasn't already bad enough, you had to deal with the wonderfully creative paranoia of medieval society. Because, in the Middle Ages, assassins weren't just feared. They were feared and hated. And not just by nobles or guards, but by everyone. To the average peasant, you weren't a man in a hood. You were a cursed creature, a walking omen, a tool of the devil. Why else could you move so silently? How else could you slip past guards and vanish in the mist? The logic wasn't, he's well trained. It was, he must be possessed. Superstition was everywhere. Some believed assassins could turn into shadows. Others thought you could become invisible under moonlight. One charming rumor claimed assassins made pacts with forest spirits and could breathe poison through keyholes. And you were at the center of it all. You walked into a village, and old women clutched their children. Farmers looked away. The local priest started sweating. And if you were carrying herbs or a foreign-looking blade, that was all it took. Witchcraft, demon servant. Burn him before he hexes the cattle, and don't even think about using poison. That wasn't medicine to them. That was dark magic. Mixing herbs, witchcraft. Stirring soup suspiciously. Hex, your entire toolkit. Just more evidence you had frog's legs in your backpack and whispered to the dead. And guess what? That kind of reputation didn't keep people at a safe distance. It made them want to light torches. The second something weird happened. A noble died. A baby got sick. A cow stopped producing milk. People started pointing fingers. Didn't we see a stranger here last week? Yeah, the quiet one. Always watching. Didn't even finish his ale. Suddenly, you weren't a mystery anymore. You were a suspect. So what did you do? You moved. Again and again. and again. Every village, every town, every face you passed was one more chance to get caught. One more chance to be burned at the stake by people who didn't know your name, but knew enough to fear it. In a world where logic lost to fear, where anything strange became a threat, where monsters were real, because people believed in them, being an assassin meant you were the worst kind of monster, the kind that looked like everyone else. And when they finally caught you, they didn't just kill you, they made an example. Let's take a moment to talk about one of the most overhyped tools in the assassin's kit: poison. Now on paper, poison sounds like the perfect solution. No struggle, no chase. Just a quiet sip of wine, a surprised gasp, and a body slumping in a chair, while everyone else at the feast wonders what was in the soup. But in practice, poison in the Middle Ages was a gamble, a nightmare, and occasionally just a very creative way to embarrass yourself. First off, there was no medieval Walgreens selling instant death in a vial. You didn't have purified toxins or precise dosing instructions. You had whatever plants you could scavenge, mushrooms you hoped weren't just psychedelic, and maybe, if you were lucky, a few chunks of mineral arsenic that might kill someone or just make them really cranky. Everything you made was eyeballed, measured in pinches, sprinkles, guesses, and prayers. Too little. Your target spends the night vomiting, sweating, and doesn't die. But now, he's super paranoid and probably doubling his guards. Too much. You poison yourself during preparation because you didn't wear gloves. Or worse, the taste is so strong, your target spits it out on the first sip and calls the taster back in for questioning. That's when your name starts circulating in all the wrong circles. And let's talk about kitchens. You couldn't just waltz in and season the roast with belladonna. Kitchens in noble households were chaotic, full of cooks, servants, tasters, and, believe it or not, dogs. Yes, some nobles trained their dogs to taste food before it ever reached the table. And if that food made the dog sick, congratulations, you just got outsmarted by a greyhound. Even if you managed to sneak something into a dish, the odds were still stacked against you. Nobles often had multiple tasters. Dishes were passed through a chain of people before hitting the plate, and some even refused to eat anything prepared by unfamiliar staff. You'd have to impersonate a cook, bribe another one, or get really creative. And let's say it worked. The poison went undetected, made it to the table, and your target actually ate it. Guess what happens next? Chaos. Not a quiet sigh, not a graceful death. Your target starts choking, screaming, foaming at the mouth, collapsing into a pudding of limbs in the middle of a feast. Everyone panics. Plates crash. Guards draw weapons. Somebody blames the wine. Someone else blames the cook. The steward's crying, the dog's barking. And you're in the corner, trying to look interested in the turnip casserole while calculating how many seconds you've got before they notice you're sweating through your disguise. Even if the poison works perfectly, the aftermath is wildly unpredictable. Some poisons take hours. Some take days. Some just give the victim a bad rash and a new list of enemies. There was no consistency, no science, just hope, and a lot of terrible herbal experiments done in caves by men who thought mercury was a fine snack. And if your target survived, they'd immediately start asking questions. And the answers always led back to you. Because in every noble court, there was always that one quiet servant, the one who smelled like sage, the one who just arrived last week and never made eye contact, the one who somehow knew how to grind powder into a paste and smear it on the cutlery. And once your cover was blown, they didn't just drag you out back and stick a sword in your ribs. No. Poisoners got special treatment. You were interrogated. Publicly. Painfully. Repeatedly. Because people didn't just want to know what you did, they wanted to know who hired you. And they had tools for that. Thumbscrews. Racks. Branding irons. or just very creative uses of hot tongs. And let's say you held out. Let's say you didn't name names. They'd still make an example out of you. Your execution wasn't quiet. It was a spectacle. Public square. Full crowd. Maybe even a priest blessing the blade. You'd be paraded stripped tied to a stake and turned into a warning, because no one feared a failed thief. No one remembered a dead smuggler, but a poisoner. That was a story people told their children to keep them in line. So why use poison at all? Because when it did work, it was the cleanest way out. No blood, no struggle, no slipped blade, just a meal and a moment. And if you were smart, if you planned perfectly, you were already gone before the first symptoms kicked in. But even then, you didn't get thanks. You didn't get a bonus. You didn't get remembered. Because here's the cruelest truth of all. Assassins never got credit. You could remove a tyrant, unravel a political plot, or erase an entire bloodline with a single cup of wine, and no one would ever know your name. That was part of the deal. No statues, no songs, no written records. Your name was never meant to be remembered. Best case, you became a rumor, a whisper, a shadow, the quiet man who never finished his ale, the woman in the servant's dress who vanished the same night the Baron died. You could pull off the most legendary hit of the century and still end up as a footnote in history. Or worse, a nameless ghost in a local legend. And if someone did know your name, that wasn't glory, that was a liability. Because assassins didn't make legacies. They made holes. The moment you became famous was the moment someone paid another assassin to make you stop breathing. You didn't get remembered. You got erased. Let's say, against all odds, you made the kill. Clean, efficient. Gone without a trace. You even got paid. Actual coin in hand. A miracle, right? Wrong again. Because now comes the final twist in the assassin's life. Your client is about to betray you. Let's be honest. They didn't hire you because they admired your skills. They didn't track you down because they thought, here's a trustworthy professional who deserves my respect. No, they hired you because they needed a problem to disappear. And you were a disposable tool to make it happen. The moment the job was done, you became a problem. You knew too much. You knew who wanted who dead. You knew where they were, what they said, maybe even how much they paid. That kind of knowledge. It wasn't power. It was danger, especially to the very person who hired you. And how did they deal with danger? They cut it loose, or cut its throat. Some clients ghosted you immediately, literally vanished. Packed their bags, left the city, changed their name. Suddenly, the man who swore loyalty over a pouch of coins is unknown and unavailable. You go back to collect, and the only thing waiting for you is a locked door and a quiet servant who shrugs a lot. Other clients were more proactive. They'd send someone after you, a second assassin. One they paid less, one who didn't ask questions. Because from their perspective, the easiest way to guarantee silence was to eliminate the person who did the dirty work in the first place. And here's the kicker. Some of those contracts were planned from the beginning. It wasn't you. Do the job, then we'll see. It was you do the job, and then we'll clean up. One contract to kill the bishop. One contract to kill you right after. No refunds, no loyalty, just risk management. Now imagine you try to fight back. You go to your client and say, pay up or I start talking. You threaten them. You try to hold them hostage with the truth. Bold move. Also, your final mistake. Because powerful people in the Middle Ages didn't negotiate with assassins. They didn't feel fear the same way you did. They had guards, resources, allies. You had a dagger and a handful of regrets. Try to blackmail a noble, and you wouldn't just be hunted, you'd be obliterated. Your name would be shouted from church steps. Priests would label you a cursed man. Town criers would describe you as a demon in human flesh. Your face would be on every wall, etched in charcoal and rage. And that's if you even got the chance to open your mouth. Chances are, someone would put steel in your back before you ever stepped near the city gates. Now sure, maybe you got lucky. Maybe your client was the rare kind of monster who kept their word. Maybe they paid you, thanked you, and didn't send someone to kill you while you counted your coins. But even then, they were watching because they knew what you were. They knew what you'd done. And more importantly, they knew you could do it again. You were the shadow that slipped through locked doors, the whisper in the dark, the death they couldn't trace. So no, even if they liked you, even if they owed you, you'd never be safe. You were the secret that couldn't be allowed to talk. You were the ghost that needed to vanish. And if you didn't, then someone else would make sure you did. Which brings us to the part no one talks about. The end game. Or rather, the lack of one. You see, most assassins didn't get to retire. There was no quiet life in the countryside, no little cottage with a vegetable garden and a dog named Lucky. No growing old and passing your secrets down to a scrappy apprentice with a heart of gold. You didn't fade away, you disappeared. If you lived long enough to even think about retirement, it meant one thing: you were already running. From clients, from enemies, from your past. And the only way to survive? Disappear completely. Change your name. Again. Shave your beard. Fake a limp. Move to a village where no one knew your face and no one asked questions. Maybe you posed as a guard. Maybe you sold herbs in the market. Maybe you pretended to be a former soldier who just didn't like to talk about it. And still you never slept well. You kept a dagger under the floorboards. You sat with your back to the wall. You watched strangers with the eyes of someone who's seen too much. Even your own reflection couldn't be trusted because something changed in you. Years of creeping through shadows, of holding your breath in silence, of making men die without a sound. It did something to your brain. Something you couldn't undo. You didn't laugh easily. You didn't cry. You didn't dream. And if you did, those dreams weren't peaceful. They were full of hands, eyes, blood, screams muffled under linen, faces you never asked to remember but couldn't forget. You didn't trust others, but worse, you didn't trust yourself, because somewhere deep down you knew. You were the thing people warned their children about. You were the monster under the bed, the face behind the curtain, the death that came quietly with no reason and no mercy. And that kind of life, it never ends well. Best case, you vanished so thoroughly, no one even remembered your name. Worst case, you got a knock at the door, and this time you were the target. So let's stretch our imagination for a moment. Let's say somehow you beat the odds. You survived the kill, the escape, the betrayal, the paranoia, and the superstitious mobs that wanted to burn you for whispering too softly in a tavern. Let's say you outlived your enemies, your clients, your allies, if you even had any. Let's say you're finally ready to walk away. Now what? Do you retire? Do you find peace? Absolutely not. Because in medieval times, assassins didn't get retirement. Not real retirement. Not the kind with a rocking chair, warm slippers, and a bowl of stew by the fire. There were no pensions, no farewell toasts, no gold watch from the guild. If you stopped working, you started dying. Why? Because you were never safe. Even if you hung up your blade, even if you buried your gear and swore to never take another job, even if you moved to a village so far off the map that it took 2 days to find the road that led to it, you were still a threat to someone. You had too many secrets in your head, too many memories, too many names. You might forget who you killed, but someone out there remembered. So what did you do? You started over. Again, new name, new identity. You became Thomas the Healer, or Marta, the widowed seamstress, or Brother Lucien, the quiet monk who never raised his voice but always kept a blade tucked into the folds of his robe. You learned to smile the right way, laugh just enough. You tended gardens, told stories, mended fences. You became a ghost pretending to be a neighbor. But it was all pretend, because you never really stopped being an assassin. You still checked every shadow. You still scanned every face. You still flinched at sudden noises. You didn't sleep deeply. You didn't trust easily. You didn't belong anywhere, and you never would, even if no one ever came for you again. And that was a big if you still had to live with yourself, with what you'd done, with the faces you remembered even when you tried not to. And no, you couldn't confess, not to a priest, not to a friend, not to the wind. Because what would you say? I once slit a duke's throat and buried his body in the wine cellar of a monastery. Yeah, that's not a fireside story. So instead, you kept quiet. You kept moving. You watched the seasons change from behind shuttered windows and wondered if anyone out there remembered the person you used to be before you became this. And the worst part, you couldn't even trust your own instincts anymore. Years of survival turned your mind into a maze. You questioned everything, every kindness, every stranger, every gift that seemed too generous, every smile that lingered a second too long. You wondered, do they know? Is this the moment? Is this the end? Because the truth is, being a successful assassin didn't mean you won the game. It just meant you got to keep playing, over and over again, in different cities, with different masks, until the line between who you were and who you pretended to be blurred so badly that even you forgot where the act ended. And what was all of it for? A few handfuls of coins, a little power, the illusion of control in a world that chewed you up and spit you out with nothing but scars and shadows. If there was any justice in the world, you'd be left alone. You'd get to fade into the hills, drink wine, and die quietly under the stars. But that's not how this ends, because there's always someone who remembers, always someone who talks, always some greedy upstart who wants to make a name for themselves by killing the legend they heard whispers about. And in the end, that's what you become. A story. The killer who got away. The hooded figure in the alley. The man who disappeared into the mountains. The woman who vanished after the queen's death. The ghost who once walked among them. You never get credit. You never get peace. You never get a legacy. Just dust. Silence. And a name no one dares say out loud. So yes, you might survive the job. You might survive the betrayal. You might even survive yourself. But you won't escape the weight of the life you chose, or rather, the life that chose you. Because assassins don't retire. They vanish. Let's not pretend. Every assassin, no matter how good, no matter how silent or clever or fast, eventually faces the one job they can't walk away from. Maybe it's the client who lied to you. Maybe it's the friend you trusted once, long ago. Maybe it's the last name on your list, the one you've kept buried deep inside your head. Or maybe, just maybe, it's someone you didn't kill, and now they're coming back to finish the story. Because the game doesn't end when you drop the blade. The game ends when someone else finds you. Let's talk about the bounty system. You might think bounties were neat little posters nailed to trees with a drawing and a price. But most of the time, it wasn't that formal. You weren't famous. You weren't a public enemy. You were a rumor with a reward. If anyone sees the man with a scar across his chin, bring him in. 5 silver for the woman with a limp and green eyes. That was all it took. Not soldiers, not knights, not agents of some royal order. Desperate people. That's who came after you. Hungry men with nothing to lose. Thieves who saw you as competition. Drunks who overheard your name once and remembered it when the gold got tight. A stable boy who spotted your dagger, recognized the curve of the blade, and figured that was worth talking about. You weren't hunted by elites. You were hunted by the hungry, and they didn't care how many people you'd killed. They didn't care how fast you were, how quietly you moved, or what poisons you carried in your belt pouch. They saw a prize. You saw the end, because you couldn't outrun everyone. The moment your face became known, even a little, even in one region, the chase began. A slow, creeping tide of recognition. It started with whispers in a tavern, then glances, then the barkeep took too long to pour your drink, then the innkeeper asked your name twice, and then someone followed you. You felt it in your spine, that itch between your shoulders, the hairs rising, the change in the wind. You turned corners you didn't need to turn. You crossed rivers without looking back. You slept in trees, in barns, in crypts, anywhere but a bed. You stopped eating warm food. You stopped talking to people. You started dreaming again, but not the good kind. The kind where every sound was a footstep, every shadow a sword. You lived in fear, and not the panic kind. No screaming, no sobbing. The quiet fear, the kind that calcifies in your bones. The kind that makes you hesitate just a second before you open a door. The kind that makes you sit in the corner of the room so you can see all the exits. That fear, that was your oldest friend. And eventually, it happened. The ambush. Maybe it was 2 men. Maybe 5. Maybe a whole band of bounty hunters. Didn't matter. They had numbers. You had skills. And maybe, just maybe, you got out. But you didn't walk away clean. You took a cut, a deep one, a rib cracked, a tendon frayed. Maybe your left hand didn't work quite the same afterward. Maybe your breathing got a little worse. Maybe you started coughing blood when it got cold. You survived, yes, but now you were wounded. And in your line of work, that meant slower, weaker, easier to find, because the only way to stay invisible was to move like you used to. And now the ghosts were gaining on you. And here's the part that stings the most. There's always a younger assassin, one who heard stories about you, one who knows the tricks you taught yourself in the dark, one who doesn't know the weight of 100 kills, one who still has hope in their eyes. That's the one who gets the final contract. Your contract, not from revenge, not from justice, from someone who just wants you gone. And that assassin, they don't hate you. They admire you. You were their legend, their myth, their cautionary tale and hero rolled into one. And as they track you through snow, through forest, through cities that once feared your name, they wonder if they'll end up like you, alone, forgotten, broken in spirit, but too dangerous to let live. And when they finally find you, they don't say much. Maybe they nod. Maybe they whisper your name. Maybe they just raise the blade respectful, like they're laying down a legacy. And you don't fight it, because you knew this day would come. You trained for it, dreamed it, dreaded it. And now that it's here, there's no rage, no panic, just silence. The same silence you gave to others again and again. Now it's your turn. And when that blade falls quick, quiet, clean, you don't scream. You don't beg. You don't even curse the stars. You smile. Because, after all these years, it's finally over. No more running. No more shadows. No more names. Just peace. The kind that only comes when the last page turns and the book is closed for good. Let's say someone stumbles across your story years later. A servant cleaning out a cellar finds a journal half-burned full of strange names and coded entries. Or a historian digs through letters sealed under floorboards and uncovers hints of a noble death that didn't add up. Maybe even a monk copying old scrolls finds a single line. He died in silence, and no one ever found the blade. But even then, they don't know you. They know pieces, hints, shadows. They argue over who did it. They draw lines on maps. They debate whether it was poison or steel or something darker. But you're gone. No name, no grave, no legacy. Because in the end, that's the cruel irony of your work. You were never meant to be remembered. Every kill you made, it got credited to unknown causes, enemy forces, or divine judgment. The noble who died at his desk, heart failure. The general who collapsed mid-campaign fever. The bishop who never woke up. A message from God. Not one obituary said, killed by the hand of a master assassin who slipped past 3 guards and vanished into the dawn. You erased people for a living, but the world erased you. And maybe that's what hurts most. Because even monsters want meaning. Even shadows want someone to say, he was here. She mattered. But assassins don't get statues. They don't get elegies. They get rumors, warnings, and maybe if they're lucky, a whispered nickname in a tavern story told by someone who doesn't even know it's true. The raven came for him. They say the Scarlet Sister never missed. There was a ghost in the walls that night. But those aren't names. They're masks, costumes. Things you wore but not who you were. Who you were. That person vanished the moment you picked up the blade. And if someone does remember, they remember you wrong. They say you were cruel, cold, a creature of the night. They tell children to behave or the knife man will come. They call you a demon, a legend, a cautionary tale. No one tells the truth, that you were tired, alone, cursed by survival, that every kill stole something from you until there was almost nothing left. That maybe, just maybe, you never wanted to be this, but you were good at it, too good, so you became it, not out of love, not out of pride, out of need. And once the need begins, it never stops. You tell yourself, it's the last one. One more job, one more payout, one more target, and then you're done. But there's always another name, always another door to slip through, always another stranger who needs someone removed. And you say yes, because that's what you do. And if someone ever writes, your story really writes it. Not just the kills, not just the vanishing acts and disguises and rumors, but the truth, the weight of it all, the nights spent hiding from your own memory. Well, maybe they'll understand that the assassin wasn't a hero, wasn't a villain, wasn't even a person by the end, just a shadow cast by other people's sins, just a name whispered only by the dying, just a final silence in a world too loud to notice you were ever there. So when the story ends, it ends without applause, without fanfare, without anyone standing over your grave, because there isn't one. There's just dirt and wind and the faintest trace of footsteps that fade before they ever reach the road. You were the silence between words, the breath before the scream, the moment when everything stopped and no one ever asked why. And that was your legacy.